In this module, we're going to be talking about trading the sentient FLD indicator. I know this is going to be your favorite part. It is mine too. As much fun as it is talking about cycles, it's a lot more fun trading them. So the first thing I'd like to say about trading the sentient FLD indicator is that there are probably as many approaches as there are traders. I am going to provide you with some basic guidelines, recommendations for how you could use the indicators to place your trades, but I would strongly encourage you to incorporate the indicator into your style of trading. If there's one thing that I've learned over the years, it is that the most successful traders have their own unique styles of trading. I can give the same indicator to two different professional traders, and they will use the indicator in subtly different ways. And so in this trading module, I'm not going to lay down absolute rules and follow this step and then that step. I'm going to provide guidelines, and I do hope you find it useful. The most important thing, I believe, is that you incorporate this indicator into your own trading style. The next thing that I'd like to say is that the charts I'm showing you only have the sentient FLD indicator on them. That's because I'm going to be focusing, obviously, on using this indicator. However, this is not meant to imply that the only tool you should be working with is the FLD indicator. I would encourage you, again, to incorporate all your other tools and use those tools together with the sentient FLD indicator. For instance, indicators such as relative strength indicators, the MACD or moving average convergence divergence indicator, or simple stochastic indicators can provide a great deal of additional information that you can use to corroborate your trading decisions using the FLD indicator. I'm not showing you any of those in these videos because I want to focus purely on the information that the FLD indicator can provide you with. So having got that out of the way, let's start by introducing the very basic concepts of trading cycles using the indicator. Here is a 15-minute chart, and I'm working with screenshots that have been taken at the close of each bar so that we can move through time and see how the indicator responded to the unfolding price action and how we could have made trading decisions. And so this is the Nasdaq, and this is a 15-minute bar. I think you might be able to make out that this over here is mid-morning for me in Europe, and so the US markets haven't yet opened. So what are we looking at here? Well, the first basic rule that I'm going to introduce you to is that you need to look at the cycle analysis and understand what that cycle analysis is telling you is expected. Sometimes that means looking at the diamonds at the foot of the chart, but most of the time we are going to be looking at these nests of lows. So here is a nest of lows. You can see we had a strong move up. This occurred in yesterday's price action. Then price came down, and you can see this orange cycle trough has been positioned somewhere over here. That was overnight. That was a 12-hour cycle trough. Then we had another bit of a move up, and now the market is moving down. Notice that I have already started drawing an M shape. That is step number one. Where are you in the M shape, and what are you expecting to happen next? It is fairly obvious that we are on this final leg of the M shape. So the first basic step to cycle trading is to understand where you are and what the markets are likely to be doing. So we are in this leg, this move down. Here is the nest of lows. It is not a perfect nest of lows. Let me just clear all of that. As you can see, it is a little bit staggered. We had a circle over here, and the whiskers for this blue cycle are really extending pretty far out. But you can see that the center of gravity, which is what I call the sort of center of where these circles are, is lying ahead of us. It's lying probably a few hours ahead of us, and so that is likely to be round about the time that the US markets open. We are looking at a 15-minute chart here, but the same principles apply no matter what time frame you are looking at in terms of these basic concepts. If you are looking at an intraday chart, you need to have an understanding of when the market is opening in the different centers around the world. If you are not trading a 24-hour market, then of course the cycle analysis is going to be more complicated, and so you should always preferably choose a market that trades, if not 24 hours a day, at least 16 or 18 hours a day. This NASDAQ market trades, I believe, about 23 hours a day, so we have fairly consistent price action that we can perform an analysis on. So step number one is, what are we expecting? We are expecting a trough lying ahead of us. We could, of course, plot some vertical lines here if we wanted to remind us of where that trough is occurring. So if I said to you, make a trade right now, just jump into it, jump into a trade, what are you going to do? Because of the fact that the market is moving down into this trough, you would probably simply jump into a short trade. That is not a recommendation. That is not how we use the FLD indicator. We don't just jump into trades. But my point is that we are developing an expectation for what is going to happen to price. And so in this case, that expectation is that price is going to move down and then price is going to move up. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to look at these FLDs and see what information the FLD is giving us. First of all, we have this sequence cycle FLD over here, the green cycle FLD. You can see that is telling us that the interaction that is expected next is a D category interaction, and that is because price is expected to cross down below the FLD. Notice these downward pointing arrows. We're looking at price crossing down below the FLD and moving down. That, of course, corroborates our earlier assumption that the market is moving down into this trough. Now, we do not make trading decisions on the basis of price interacting with the sequence cycle FLD. That is what the signal cycle is for. Our trading signals are generated by the signal cycle FLD. That is important concept number 2. The signals are generated by the signal cycle FLD. But the interactions with the other FLDs provide us with useful corroborating evidence of what we are expecting to happen in the market. Now let me point out danger with being a cycle analyst. Here is our nest of lows. So potentially this cycle trough could be happening now. We have recently seen 2 bars where price has moved up. Basic concept number 3 is that we do not jump the gun. Be very careful of the fact that because we're expecting a trough, we jump in the moment it looks to us as if though a trough is forming. We must wait for our signal from the signal cycle. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to step forward bar by bar and explain a few more of our basic concepts as we do that. Let's step forward 1 bar. You will notice that something interesting has happened in our analysis. That nest of lows has turned into a stack of diamonds. Now, many traders would say, that is what I'm waiting for. I'm waiting for those diamonds to form. That, I should point out, is a mistake. Those diamonds will form if the indicator believes it has enough evidence that a trough has formed, and so we do certainly pay attention to those diamonds, and we are going to be looking for those stacks of diamonds, because the first trade that we will be making in our sequence, remember our sequence of interactions between price and the FLD from A through to H, our first trading opportunity is an A category trading opportunity, and that will occur after a trough of the sequence cycle has formed. Notice that the sequence cycle is the second cycle down in this trough that has potentially formed. But seeing that pile of diamonds at the foot of the chart does not mean that you jump into a trade. Why? Because of our earlier mentioned basic concept that we wait for the signal cycle. But notice something else that has happened here. We have some targets to the downside. Remember when the nest of lows was still present at the foot of the chart, we still seem to have some time. So what has happened? Well, because of the principle of variation, the indicator does know it is possible that this trough could come in early, and maybe it has, but we are not going to be trading that yet. We do know, however, that our nest of lows was over here. We are still thinking we have a few hours ahead of us, and the fact that we now have these lower targets in place, those are targets for the 1-day cycle. The 1-day cycle is, of course, our sequence cycle on the 15-minute chart, and so we have some targets to the downside. We are aware that the market might still move down. Perhaps you're thinking to yourself, oh, if the market's going to move down, let's jump into a short trade. Well, hang on a moment. Remember our rule about trading according to the signal cycle FLD. Yes, if you want to jump into a short trade, that's up to you, but strictly speaking, that is not really trading the FLD indicator. So let's step forward another bar. And you can see price is not really doing very much, so we're going to speed things up a little bit and keep stepping forward. This looks like it might be lunchtime in London maybe, and the traders are having a bit of a long lunch, and so the market has gone a little quiet. But oh, look what happened here. A lower price on this bar over here has changed our analysis again. The indicator has reconsidered the fact that that 2-day cycle trough has occurred, obviously, and here is our nest of lows again. So we're back to the same situation. Was it a problem that the indicator positioned the 2-day cycle trough beneath this low over here? It wasn't a problem at all, because as you can see, price didn't get anywhere near our signal cycle FLD. So it is not as if though we have jumped into a long trade on the basis of that. I hope that you bore in mind the earlier basic concept that you should wait for your signal cycle. So let's keep stepping forward again and see what happens. Price is moving down towards that 2-day cycle trough. So again, we're wondering, is it possible that that 2-day cycle trough has formed? Let's keep moving forward and see what happens. Again, the indicator positions a 2-day cycle trough there in terms of the stack of diamonds. And again, we remember our basic concept. We don't jump into a long trade simply because that stack is there. Notice, however, that the recommendation for the next interaction between price and the signal cycle FLD is for an A category interaction. We are getting pretty close to these targets over here, aren't we? And we potentially have a cycle trough that has formed. The US markets have not yet opened, but we are now standing by for an entry into a long trade. Let's keep stepping forward and see what happens. Price comes up towards that FLD. Here is the next basic concept. We do not set our entry at the level of the FLD, because what if this cycle trough still lies ahead of us? If that is the case, then we know that this FLD is a bit like a magnet to price, and we are likely to see price come up to the FLD, find resistance, and then move down again. So we not only wait for price to touch the signal cycle FLD, but we wait for it to confirm a cross of that FLD. Let's keep stepping forward. Price is shying away from that FLD. Look at that. It's not going to make it. And suddenly it drops down again. Our analysis changes back again. And here we have a nest of lows for that 2-day cycle trough. But as you can see, the time is pretty much upon us, isn't it? We have been edging closer and closer to the expected time of that cycle trough. Notice something else. We have just hit our 1-day targets from our 1 hour and 30-minute time frames. Those targets that were lingering just off to the right-hand side of the chart have now been met. Things are beginning to come together. And so this is the next basic concept. We anticipate a trough forming on the basis of a cycle analysis. When targets are met, our expectation that that trough is in the process of forming increases. And this brings me to the next basic idea behind trading cycles. We have already anticipated the fact that a cycle trough is forming because of the cycle analysis, the nest of lows at the foot of the chart. When we start seeing these targets being met, it is as if though we can apply a check mark. We have a trough approaching, check. We have targets reached, check. Now we are waiting for interaction with our signal cycle FLD. So let's keep stepping forward. You'll notice that price has started to move up. We are approaching the time at which the New York markets are going to open. And in fact, I think this bar might have been the opening 15 minutes. In the earlier video about the nature of price action, I discussed this kind of move, which you will often see happening. Notice the price didn't quite reach that FLD, but it certainly could have. It was pretty close. Another reason why we do not set entry levels at the level of the FLD. That would be a mistake. But now that price has sort of traced out a bit of action there, we could certainly consider entering a long trade if price exceeds that high level, because of the fact that we are expecting a price cross, an acceleration point over that signal cycle FLD. Let's keep stepping forward and see what happens. Now price has come right up almost to the level of that FLD, as you can see. We have a previous price high over here and an interesting situation where if price stays at exactly the same level as it is now, it will effectively have crossed above that FLD. At this point, we will consider entering into a long trade. And so the next basic concept behind trading the sentient FLD indicator is that when price approaches our signal cycle FLD, we need to construct entry parameters. We do not enter at the level of the FLD. Under some circumstances, you will wait until price closes above the level of the FLD and enter your trade then. When you have a situation such as we have here, where you have an obvious price high above the level of that FLD, then you could set your trade entry on the basis of that. Notice too what the other FLDs are telling us, and this is really important. Our mid-cycle FLD also has an acceleration point sitting just above us. Our sequence cycle FLD, as a matter of interest, also has acceleration points at the level of the FLD. This is like a series of green lights. So let's just recap our situation, because this is a critical moment. We have a potential trough. Here is our nest of lows right beneath this price action. This trough occurred right at the level of these targets. That's a very good time for the market to turn around. We have a green light with the A category interaction expected with our signal cycle, another green light with the A category interaction with our mid-cycle, and a third green light with our E category interaction with our sequence cycle. It's like the lights in the road ahead of us have all turned green. We are feeling fairly good and optimistic. At this point, therefore, we would construct some kind of an entry into this potential trade. We'll be speaking about entry in a little more detail later, so let's move on and see what happened. Notice two things happened. First of all, price has crossed up above our signal cycle FLD. There is the actual crossing point. If we had set our entry at the level of this high, we would have been stopped into the market. The other thing you should notice is that the scaling on the chart has changed. That is partly because we had a lower bar over here on the left-hand edge, which has now disappeared off the chart, but also because we have auto scaling enabled, and so the sentient FLD indicator is scaling to show the target that it has down here for the one-day cycle, which was not quite achieved. But we still have our green lights with the mid-cycle and the sequence cycle over here. We now have a 6-hour cycle target. The next basic concept when it comes to trading the sentient FLD indicator is that having constructed an entry on the basis of interaction with the signal cycle FLD, we will turn our attention to the signal cycle target. That is our first target for the price move. We will also turn our attention to the other FLDs to see what potential roadblocks there are in terms of achieving that target. You will notice that the mid-cycle FLD is below the 6-hour cycle target. Although we are expecting an acceleration point across the mid-cycle FLD, an FLD can always cause an obstruction, so we need to be aware of it. Let's step forward and see what happened. Look how price came right up to the level of our mid-cycle FLD and then it stalled. Do we at this point panic? No. We are still feeling confident about our cycle trough, which you can see has now again been converted into a stack of diamonds. We're feeling very good about the fact that these targets were achieved at the time that that trough formed. We've had an A category interaction, which we have traded, and we are still aiming towards this 6-hour cycle target as a first target for this cycle move. We are still expecting an A category acceleration from the mid-cycle FLD. The fact that price recoiled from that FLD is not unusual. particularly when it comes to a mid-cycle FLD, which has more power than the signal cycle FLD, and when it comes to the sequence cycle FLD, we're likely to see even more power from that line. So let's step forward and see what happened. Price is making another attempt to get through that mid-cycle FLD. Notice that the chart has rescaled again, and we have a 12-hour cycle target. Are we expecting that target to be achieved? Yes, because here is a 2-day cycle trough. This interaction with the mid-cycle FLD is expected to be an A category interaction, and we do expect A category interactions to reach up and achieve their targets. And so we are still looking good for this trade, and let's see what happened next. Price has stumbled. Again, it has failed to get across that mid-cycle FLD. Let's step forward and see again what happened. Here, finally, price breaks up through the mid-cycle FLD. Time for another basic concept to trading the FLD. When an FLD is encountered, even when you are expecting an acceleration point, the FLD will often cause hesitation in the price. Price will often rebound a little from that FLD, particularly, as mentioned, when it is a mid-cycle FLD, and even more so when it is a sequence cycle FLD. So here is our 6-hour target. That 6-hour target has not moved, of course. It has flipped over to the left-hand side of the bar because of the fact that it has been fulfilled or achieved. You might have taken some profits at this point. You probably would not have closed all of your trade because you are still feeling optimistic about price accelerating through this sequence cycle FLD and hopefully achieving this mid-cycle target. Let's step forward another bar. Price is now reaching up towards that sequence cycle FLD. We still have our 12-hour target up at the top, so let's keep going. Notice price slowing down a little as it approaches that sequence cycle FLD. But our next bar gives us a good clean cross right over that sequence cycle FLD, making you wonder whether that basic concept about the fact that price reacts to an FLD has any truth to it at all. I can assure you it does, but there will be occasions when price will tear through an FLD, even a sequence cycle FLD, as it has done here. Price has now achieved our 12-hour target. Notice that we have another 12-hour target from the 30-minute chart over here. We also have a bunch of 1-day targets over here, and there's a 10-day target. Time for another basic concept. Although we are working with multiple FLDs on a chart, you cannot keep stepping up your targets to the next cycle and the next cycle and so on and so forth. When you are trading a time frame, you need to stick to that time frame. Of course, you can run with your trade, but you need to be realistic here. This is an E category interaction that has probably occurred over here. An E category interaction in our M shape occurs where? It occurs over here. And so that means that the sequence cycle FLD interaction that has just occurred is projecting a target up to the second peak of the M shape. Now that might be a good target to go for, but we need to exercise caution. If we were going for the first peak of the M shape, we'd be much more enthusiastic. So we might aim for that target, but we are not going to hang on for dear life in the hopes of achieving it. The fact that we have achieved our 12-hour target is good enough for us at the moment, given the strength of the cycle trough out of which we are bouncing. Just as a note, the cycle analysis is not displayed at the foot of this chart. That's because of the automated screenshot taking process, where sometimes the screenshot is taken before the analysis has actually been plotted. It's a matter of milliseconds, but that does sometimes happen. So let's step forward. Price, having achieved the 12-hour target, you can see, is beginning to drift sideways. That is certainly a sign that potentially that is the end of this market move. So let's consider what we are expecting to happen next. Here we have our trough of the 2-day cycle. There's that analysis back on the chart. That's the trough of the 2-day cycle. Here's our A category interaction. We achieved this target, and we also achieved the 12-hour target. So we're doing very well. What's expected next in terms of our analysis? Well, next is, of course, the next trough of the 6-hour cycle, our signal cycle, and that trough is expected to occur at about the level of the signal cycle FLD for our BC category interaction. There they are, right down over here. So we would not be surprised, having achieved the 12-hour cycle target, to see price dropping down into the 6-hour cycle trough and forming that trough at about the level of the signal cycle FLD. Time for another basic concept of trading the FLD. Keep your eye on the analysis. This strong upward move is looking wonderful, and it looks as if though it can just keep going in a straight line all the way up to this target. Maybe it can, but bear in mind the nests of lows that we have at the foot of the chart. We are looking for a 6-hour cycle trough, which is going to happen soon. The other thing we need to bear in mind is time. You can see that this bar over here, which was way back over here, was at 5:45 in the evening. That's European time, so there's a bit of a time zone calculation involved. But the point is that we are running out of day. Fairly soon we're going to have to wrap up this trade, trading the 15-minute chart. We're not going to hang in on a trade for several days. So we're going to wrap up the trade before the session end. Let's step forward again. And you can see price making another move. Note our 12-hour, 30-minute target still up there. Perhaps it just wants to achieve that. There we go. It has, in fact, achieved that 12-hour target on the 30-minute chart. Now we've achieved those targets. We have a bit of a gap until we reach the 1-day targets up here. Time is running out. We might make it. I'm not going to close everything at this point, but I will certainly start setting some tight stops. Probably start setting some stops below this bar over here. And so another basic idea behind trading the FLD is that once targets have been achieved, you have a choice. You can close your trades at the target, and many traders do that, and they're very successful because price has achieved the target and they take their profits and they go off and they do other things. But once a target has been achieved, particularly a target that is important to the time frame that you're trading, and a 12-hour target is fairly important when we're trading a 15-minute chart. So you will either want to take your profits and stop trading or set tight stops when you see targets being achieved. Let's keep stepping forward and see what's happening. Some of us would be out of the game at this point. You can see the price is still trying to head up towards those targets, and it has dropped back down again, potentially triggered our stops, and now it is definitely moving down into this 6-hour cycle trough that we see over here. At this point, I probably would have been stopped out. In fact, as price formed this bar over here, notice the shape of this bar with the shadow at the top and the shadow at the bottom, I probably would have set a very tight stop and would have closed my trades at that point there. I'd be wrapping up for the day, but let's just keep stepping forward and see what actually happens for the rest of this day. Price is making a second attempt to rush up. It fails, however, and is dropping down again. Price is pretty much forming a bit of a triangle, it looks like. You will often see triangles forming at the time that the FLD rises to provide support, so that's not unusual. But at this point, it's after dinner time here in Europe, and the American markets are about to close. And as you can see, we are settling down and finding support at the level of the FLD. And so at that point, we'll stop tracking this sequence. In the next video, we're going to move a little beyond the basic concepts and speak in a little more detail about the nitty-gritty of entering into your trades.